Child by 10 famous directors, a provocative night at the opera in
less than or around 3/4 of a mile.
In a separate incident, 3 more people were hurt after a stolen car crashed in Heckmondwike after a police chase. It's not the way the police want any pursuit to end, but they say they'd be failing in their duty if they didn't give chase.
Sheffield is to pilot a new reading programme in an effort to improve literacy in the city's schools. 30 teachers from a range of schools have been learning the new method before taking it into classrooms next week. Our education correspondent Liz Meach reports.
It's time for the teachers to learn. They're being taught a new reading method based on phonetics. Critics see this as an old-fashioned method, but it's one that's been welcomed by teachers who feel their training was inadequate.
There's been a lot of schemes around and it's bitty, it's part of this, it's really what you want to teach, and I think this gives you a framework that you can use yourself.
Everyone is looking to improve literacy. If this scheme proves a success in Sheffield, it'll be adopted by schools across the country.
And that's it from me. Next to national weather with Bill Giles. From all of us at Look North, enjoy your weekend. Good night.
A very good evening to you. We all know it's been a very cold May. In fact, it's turning out to be one of the coldest Mays this century, and indeed one of the coldest Mays in the last 300 years. Records have been tumbling up and down the country. At Leeds, for instance, the coldest since their records began. Admittedly, they haven't begun very long ago, but down in Manchester too, the coldest May that they've seen on record. Just to the south of Lincoln equals the coldest since their records began, and second or third coldest May in Cardiff, 2 degrees lower than the average there, and one of the coldest Mays this century across into Belfast. And it's not going to be very much better as we start June. Temperatures very much the same as they have been today, but it does look as though it's going to warm up over England and Wales by Tuesday, and it could become very warm in parts of the southeast by the time we come across in towards Wednesday as well. Tonight then, showers in the north, down the western side as well, so a fairly mild night here with temperatures about 7 or 8 degrees at the lowest. That's around 45 degrees Fahrenheit. The low pressure then that's brought the strong winds continuing to move away, so although the winds will be fairly strong, particularly in the north to start with tomorrow, they'll gradually be easing down as we go through the day. So what about the weather? Over central and eastern parts of England, eastern parts of Wales, eastern parts of Scotland, starting off dry with a fair amount of sunshine, but showers in the north, down the western side too. Showers developing further east, pushing eastwards through the day. More showers, I think, in the east than there has been today. And if I had to pick an area which may well miss the showers tomorrow, or at least most of them, I think that'll probably be the southeast of England. Temperatures, as we've seen, very much the same as they have been today, up to 18 Celsius at the best, 64 Fahrenheit. Sunday, we've got this problem of the little low pushing its way down across into France. And to know how far north the cloud's going to go, I would suggest at the moment Wales, Midlands, across to the Wash. South of that, a cloudy morning, outbreaks of rain, most of the rain in the south, but then clearing away Sunday afternoon and showers further north. On Monday morning, starting bright in the east, rain pushing eastwards, but not much rain in the south. That's it. Bye-bye for now.
It's make or break time for course 354.
I just want to get out there and prove that I can do it.
The flying soldiers are at the brink.
That fear of getting kicked off the course really does start to bite.
They must prove they can go solo. But on the ground...
Sometimes I get the impression the team don't want me involved.
Going it alone can hurt.
Liz is lazy.
She's highly strung.
She's mad.
An hour of ups and downs, Tuesday from 9:30 on BBC1.
The success of women medics on television is examined in the new Radio Times, which also contains complete listings for all television and major satellite channels.
Henry was a high flyer who thought he had it all.
And call my wife and tell her I can't make dinner.
But nobody's life comes with a guarantee.
Henry can't speak. His memory might be deeply affected.
So Henry has the chance to start again.
How did you learn to do that?
You taught me.
Harrison Ford and Annette Bening star in Regarding Henry, tonight at 10:20 on BBC1.
Real-life second chances now on BBC1 as Michael Burke and Juliette Morris present more dramatic rescue stories.
All of tonight's rescues are true stories. We've sometimes used actors and stuntmen, but everything you see is based on the accounts of the people involved. They've helped us to reconstruct events as they happened. Tonight on 999, the British nurse who caught a killer virus in Africa. More than 100 people helped to save her life. How you can stay fit and healthy when you go to far-flung places. And a chance in a million as a pilot swoops down from the skies to throw a life raft to a drowning man. They call this a negative pressure patient isolator. It's an isolation tent where they put patients with very infectious diseases. It's got a highly specialized filtration unit which ensures that all the air coming out of the tent is completely sterilized. If there was to be a leak, then the fact that there's lower pressure in there means the air is always sucked in and never blown out. The hospital staff work through these plastic suits, which means that they never come into direct contact with the patients. And absolutely everything that comes out of the tent does so in sealed plastic bags, which are immediately incinerated. Fortunately, it's used very infrequently, maybe once a year. The patients normally come from the tropics, where they've contracted the disease. Places like Sierra Leone in West Africa, where Jill Sanderson and her boyfriend Dominic O'Dwyer were working for VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas. In our reconstruction, they're played by actors. Jill was a trained midwife working in a remote bushland area. What follows is the story of a remarkable rescue involving more than 100 people, all determined to help a woman who dedicated her life to helping others.
She's special because she's my firstborn and she's like me. She's done the things that I wanted to do. I'm a trained nurse and a midwife, and I think that Jill thought she'd like to have the same profession as myself.
Unfortunately, there were no postings together, so we ended up 25 miles apart. I was working as an English teacher in a Catholic mission school.
The lion?
Yeah. The lion, he has a big head and a very small waist, and a very small waist.
I used to really look forward to our weekends together. It's the happiest I've ever known her.
She was a very vivacious, lively, bubbly person. Jill was working in the nearest mission hospital to where I was.
But 6 months after she started in that hospital, something happened that was to affect Jill's life in a way that nobody could have predicted.
It's okay, just breathe. Breathe.
A mother had come into the hospital with a fever.
She's about to deliver. Have some help here, please. Come on.
Jill had delivered the baby, and then both mother and baby died shortly afterwards. I felt very sad for the mother who died and the baby and their family. I didn't feel concerned for Jill because I didn't realise that Jill had been put at any risk.
I'm just going to take your temperature.
Several days later, Jill began to show signs of fever, which isn't uncommon in West Africa.
I came back from holiday and found that Jill had already been ill and undergoing treatment for malaria. They were at the stage where they were thinking, well, either the malaria is resistant or it's typhoid. They decided that if she hadn't responded to the treatment by the next morning, that they would refer her to Shirley Hospital, where there was a Lassa fever centre. The priest came over with his truck, and Jill was settled inside, propped up by pillows, and we travelled I think it's 30 miles to Shirley on dirt roads, very bumpety, potholed, riddled roads.
Shigwema was the village where Dominic lived.
I remember one lunchtime, Father Paddy turned up, and I'd only seen him a few days before.
Hello, Father, how are you? Dominic. What are you doing here?
He said, Jill's not too well. I've brought her down. She's over at the hospital now.
How are you?
I hoped that it wouldn't prove to be Lassa fever, that it would just be some non-specific virus or fever, which is so common in Africa, which would disappear a few days later.
You haven't been feeling very well.
It was an amazing set of circumstances, I think, in Jill's situation. Purely by coincidence, 27 miles away from her is the world's only treatment protocol for Lassa fever. The only situation in the world where she could get medicine that might work. Of course, at that time it was might or might not work. We didn't know for sure.
It's a 90/60 and her pulse is 120.
She was basically semi-comatose at the time I saw her. An extremely high fever, almost 40 centigrade.
Did you deliver any patients with fever while you were working as a midwife in Panguma?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
She was so ill.
Were you wearing gloves, though? Jill? Gloves?
No time.
Our blood test examination showed basically everything looked like a typical impending fatal case of Lassa.
We'll get her on ribavirin right away.
We used a new drug called ribavirin, and because of the severity of her situation and symptoms, we also added a drug called prostacyclin, which was an experimental drug which has never been used in Lassa fever before, and it was a gamble.
The next few days are going to be very critical. All we can do is hope that she doesn't go into a coma.
At that time, I didn't have an inkling that she would be so very ill.
There was a few days of stability, and Jill didn't actually want her parents informed at that stage.
But then, very quickly, she started to deteriorate.
You must try and relax, Jill.
It was the worst night of my life.
Dominic, wait outside, please. Wait outside. Jill?
It was as if suddenly she was completely conscious, realised what was going on, was in complete agony, and then just lapsed into this coma.
It was just like an epileptic fit. Your whole body went into spasm. It was a moment of despair to a certain extent, because you knew that by then that nobody who had been unconscious had ever recovered.
I'm going to lose her.
I'm going to pray for her.
Although I'd never experienced death before, I knew that she was probably dying.
We'd send for the priest for last rites, and frankly, I didn't think she'd be there the next morning.
I sat by Jill's bed in this room with just a hurricane lamp. I remember holding her hand very tightly, trying to use my energy to help her ebbing strength to fight this Lassa fever. I felt that there weren't any humans who could help me anymore, and only God could help me. And I prayed as I've never prayed before in my life. I'll always remember that dawn. That dawn was really symbolic. Jill was still alive, and the new day brought new hope for me.
There's a great improvement from last night.
Looks like the edema's gone down.
Quite a bit.
Temperature?
It's 38 it's still up.
Very good
I
sign.
think I said something to him like,
Keep our fingers crossed.
Dominic, I think we got her through, or something like that. And he was, of course, overjoyed.
Urine output?
It's actually starting to flow, so it's great.
Ribavirin, the drug we use to treat Lassa fever, keeps the virus from replicating, but it also keeps red cell production in the blood from occurring. So frequently, when patients were treated with ribavirin, it was necessary to transfuse them.
This is not good. O positive.
Dominic's blood type
Thank you.
would have been marginally useful to her, except that he had Rh positive blood and she was Rh negative.
Excuse me! Stop!
One of the problems that we were concerned with was being sure that the blood that we transfused her with did not contain malaria parasites.
My girlfriend's not very well. She's got a terrible fever. We need you to go and find some blood donors for her.
Fortunately, there was no shortage of Peace Corps volunteers with motorcycles.
It was amazing how quickly the word got round, and before long the place was flooded with people willing to give blood.
People came from as far away as Freetown, 180 miles away. They came down from the bush to give blood. No effort was spared. And we really depended on them.
5 days later, Jill's parents flew out to Sierra Leone. Their daughter was still in a coma.
Very ill. I didn't know anything about Lassa fever, and if I had, I should have been absolutely devastated, because when we did get there and see how ill Jill was, we realised that she was dangerously ill.
Jill, your mum and dad are here to see you.
To see her as she lay there, looking really ill, was very hard.
Jill had survived the coma, but now her breathing was causing serious concern.
Nice and slow. Just breathe. Just
Jill was breathing in an extremely rapid, shallow manner, and her findings on physical examination of her chest suggested that she had a viral pneumonia from Lassa virus. This is a very serious situation that usually ends in death.
Jill? 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 Dominic, we need to get to hospital. Get help quickly. Quickly.
It was then decided in the end that she needed tracheostomy, which is just a hole here to let the air in and out here.
We could hear this laboured breathing, and we wondered where it was coming from. And believe you me, when we realised it was Jill, we just didn't know what was happening.
Father! Father! Jill, she can't breathe. We need to get her to the hospital. Can you
She was
help?
chain stoking, and normally you only hear a person breathing like that when they're about to die.
The operation had to be done quickly, in the dead of night. She became very agitated, and I could see she was frightened. Now Jill was conscious again. She could feel fear. And it's horrible to see someone suffering and afraid. I was worried because I knew the hospital didn't have the proper resources to perform this operation. There was hardly any power in the hospital, and Jill would once again be thrust into a crisis.
As soon as they actually did the tracheostomy, her breathing was normal. She was over the worst as far as Lassa was going, but what she did need was the long-term medical care. So she needed to go home from every aspect, from the risk of secondary infection, from nutrition and from rehabilitation.
There were problems from the public health point of view about allowing her back in the country. She might come back and introduce Lassa fever to the United Kingdom.
You'll be back later.
Although we could see the reasons objectively, it was very hard not to feel abandoned.
And I went over to the Freetown Golf Club, where the British High Commission were all enjoying an afternoon golf game, and announced my intention to either bring this to the attention of the press or to leave it in their hands to do the right thing and take Jill home.
Britain agreed to take Jill if her isolation could be guaranteed. The RAF aeromedical team was the only service trained to carry out such a difficult evacuation. With them was Dr. Stuart Glover from Ham Green Hospital in Bristol.
This is the first time that my particular team had been involved with an infection, a viral infection of this sort, and we really didn't know what we were going to be facing and how we would cope with it ourselves, let alone Jill's ability to cope with it. The major fear, I think, was the fear of the unknown. Lassa fever had developed quite a vicious press. This was the first time that I'd seen Lassa fever in the flesh. We had practiced many times with healthy dummies, so to speak, but this was the first time for real.
Dr. Glover was flown out in a VC-10 with RAF nurse Helen Ryan and a team of 19 people and an isolation tent. On arrival in Freetown, 2 RAF doctors flew ahead to the village to assess Jill's condition and arrange her transfer.
The logistics of getting her that 245 miles from Shigwema, this little village where we were, to the airport were horrendous. Fortunately, the then president of Sierra Leone, Shaka Stevens, offered his personal presidential helicopter to transfer her. We'd moved some mountains, and we had her going home, and that was a great feeling. We were going to miss her. I mean, she was a tremendous force to get a lot of good focused in one place. And
was waiting on the tarmac at Freetown Airport, and I saw this huge RAF plane, and my heart sank. And there were people in orange suits with gas masks.
It was quite alarming, really. You know, you think of men going into space.
I thought, Jill is a dangerous person for Britain.
In retrospect, they were over the top in England, but one must recall that in making decisions of how you're going to manage patients, it has to be based on what the scientific literature is that's available, because obviously managing Lassa cases is not something that happens every day.
Lassa fever is a contagious disease. One of the dangers is the fact that there was no known cure for it. So you obviously wanted to keep the risk to an absolute minimum of anybody contracting the disease. So there was no question in our minds that as the isolator existed and the suits that everybody needed were there, that we just took what we had. When we got it into the isolator, you have a complete airtight barrier between you and the patient. We were really terribly shocked at the sight of Jill, and we looked at each other and thought, it's quite possible that she could actually die on us. There was a real possibility also that even if she did survive, that she could actually be brain damaged.
We went on afterwards, and we all breathed a sigh of relief because she was off African soil and going home.
The one thing that she really needed was to be comforted and reassured in some way. But within the isolator, it was incredibly hard. We had considered the possibility of Jill suffering a cardiac arrest or respiratory arrest during the flight. We felt there was absolutely no way that we could basically stand by and watch her die in the bubble. So we decided that we would then lift her out of the isolator and put the stretcher down on the floor of the aircraft and resuscitate her. We knew what the risks were. I felt very much that here was a fellow nurse who had had the most terrible thing actually happen to her as a price for going out and trying to help people.
A British nurse who's suffering from Lassa fever is being flown home today from Sierra Leone.
Ham Green Hospital near Bristol is one of just 6 centres in Britain capable of dealing with Lassa fever. For the next few weeks...
I saw the lights of Bristol beneath us, and that was very exciting. I thought, we're almost home.
Ladies and gentlemen, the captain...
After a 7-hour flight, the team prepared for landing.
What would have normally happened would have been we'd have all gone and sat down and strapped ourselves in for good safety reasons. But she was starting to show signs of anxiety. She started to thrash around. She could have pulled out a tracheostomy tube. She certainly could rip a drip out. There was almost a feeling of don't you dare do anything now. We've come this far. We were only a matter of a few seconds off touching down. 2 of the crew raced up and got behind us and braced us. There are landings where you're not really too sure whether you've actually touched down or not, but on this landing we knew. We felt we just needed to get her out of the aircraft and get her to Ham Green Hospital, to a safe environment.
There was a barrage of lights, police escorts. I was amazed. I hadn't expected the press interest or the media interest at all.
Jill was flown in to board a specially equipped Air Force VC-10. She was sealed inside an isolation bubble designed by the RAF for just such an emergency. Bubble and patient were offloaded by forklift truck and installed in a furniture van for the short journey to hospital.
Open your mouth wide. I took over the care of a young lady whose previous care had been exemplary. And I think but for that standard of care in West Africa, Jill would not have survived this illness. Nothing was allowed to come out of the tent that had been in direct contact with Jill. Everything that she had touched was burned. She was in isolation for about 8 weeks in total. Towards the latter part of her stay, there was a sense of frustration and also a sense of being inhibited, being held back by the constraints of the tent. Her urine was persistently positive for virus, and only when we had 3 consecutive negative samples of urine, we were able to release her.
And then suddenly, Jill came around the corner in a wheelchair, and all those awful weeks, all that nightmare, just evaporated. We were together again.
It's just marvellous to feel the fresh air and to be able to really touch real people again, not just plastic people.
I remember almost hitting the ceiling, it felt like it, and repeating the words Lassa fever and thinking, why aren't I dead? This woman came in very strong labour and delivered in the outpatient clinic while I was there, and I went to help her and, of course, didn't have time to look for gloves, so I literally just caught the baby in my bare hands. She died, and she was diagnosed as having Lassa fever. I remember being told to go to bed and not being very willing to, wanting to carry on with my job and thinking it was my own silly fault because I'd had a good party the night before. I just remember feeling very, very lucky to be alive and feeling very sorry for thousands of people in Africa with Lassa fever that didn't have a tenth of the chance that I had.
We're now married with 3 children. Those memories of Lassa fever seem very distant. I'm so happy that I still got her and we're still together.
I'm really pleased that she's doing so well. We saved UK a nurse midwife who's still productively bringing babies into the world. That's great.
I knew Jill would come back again, and she did. It's a miracle. But then I believe in miracles.
It's incredibly unlikely you'd contract Lassa fever. Since Jill was rescued by the RAF, nobody's been brought back to this country in a similar condition. And even in Africa, Lassa fever is rare. But you shouldn't take risks when travelling in the tropics. Things you wouldn't think twice about doing at home become hazardous abroad. You're taking a chance in some countries just paddling in the water, which might be infected. The Hospital for Tropical Diseases has this advice.
4 to 6 weeks before your holiday, get proper medical advice and make sure you stick to it while you're away. If you're going anywhere outside Europe and North America, you'll need jabs for tetanus, polio, and even hepatitis A and typhoid, which are diseases you can catch from infected food and water. We're very used to being cautious about drinking water abroad and increasingly aware that even eating ice cream and putting ice cubes in drinks can give us a nasty dose of traveller's diarrhea. But in some parts of the world, you can pick up more unusual infections simply by splashing in water. Paddling or even dipping your hands in any of Africa's rivers, including the Nile, could leave you with bilharzia. This infection is caused when a parasite enters the body through the skin and grows into a worm. It lives in the bloodstream and it lays eggs which can damage the liver and bladder. As a nation of animal lovers, it's often tempting to stroke dogs and cats, but if you're bitten, scratched or even licked by an animal anywhere outside the UK, you run the risk of catching rabies. It's a killer disease and is currently widespread in many parts of Southeast Asia, like Thailand. If you're bitten by an animal, you must take it seriously and make sure you get immediate medical attention. Mosquitoes are responsible for spreading malaria, the most common disease a lot of travellers will come across. Every year we make more than 1 million trips to places where malaria is a risk. It kills 10 people from this country every year. If you're going anywhere in Africa, India or South America, you'll need to start taking your anti-malaria tablets at least a week before you go. And remember to carry on taking them for another month once you're back. Some tablets may have unpleasant side effects. Always read the information provided. Other diseases spread by mosquitoes include yellow fever, which you can be vaccinated against, and dengue fever, which you can't. The best way to protect yourself against dengue fever and other diseases spread by mosquitoes is to avoid being bitten in the first place. Use a long-acting insect repellent and make sure it contains the chemical called DEET. It needs to be effective for 24 hours because infectious mosquitoes bite both day and night. You also need to use insect repellent and cover your arms and legs to prevent being bitten by disease-carrying ticks. Ticks that live in the forests and wooded areas of North America and in some parts of Europe, including Austria and Germany, spread Lyme's disease, which can lead to chronic arthritis and sometimes brain damage. And in parts of Africa and Asia, ticks can carry typhus, which causes high body temperatures, sickness, and even death. Once a tick has bitten you, it stays attached to your skin. Only remove it if you're confident you can pull it out intact. Otherwise, seek professional help, as it's important not to leave the head under the skin. This can quickly cause infection. Further information on health advice for travellers is available in a Department of Health booklet, which is free from all post offices. Remember, seek early medical advice and stick to it. Make sure you have the correct vaccinations. Only swim or paddle if you're confident the water is safe. And prevent disease by avoiding bites and stings.
Being properly prepared is one of the most important factors in preventing illnesses or accidents from happening. But would you be properly prepared if you were faced with an unexpected emergency? The BBC 999 Lifesaver video has 24 information films about some of the most common emergencies you're likely to come across. Everything from what to have in your first aid kit to staying safe in the sun. Now, if you'd like a copy, send a cheque or a postal order for £9.99, made payable to BBC Education, to 999 Lifesaver Video Pack, PO Box 7, London W5 2GQ. And you'll find that address on CFAX, page 621.
This is the River Esk at Longtown in Cumbria. It's a popular location for fishing for salmon and trout, and during the season, fishermen come from all over the country to try their luck here. It's only a short wade out onto the sandbanks in the middle of the river, which is the best spot for fishing. Generally, the water's only 1 or 2 foot deep and not terribly fast flowing, so it's pretty easy to get out there. But this river can change, as Brian Holland discovered. He was on holiday here in Longtown from his home in Ipswich. It was an annual fishing trip for Brian, played here by an actor. Over the years, he'd become good friends with David Rayson, a local water bailiff who knew the river well.
How are you this morning? Brian he's a very, very keen angler. He's done a lot of fishing, he's been in a lot of places, but he likes to come back to the Esk, to the River Esk in Longtown. It's a well-known salmon river and he's very, very keen.
Where are we going to start from then, Dave?
I couldn't believe the conditions that we found when we arrived at the riverbank, because the water was absolutely gin clear. It was a perfect fly water.
The bit where we cross, you've got to watch the undercurrents. One slip and you're away.
Take it easy.
I've known of 2 folk drowning because of the current. As soon as I get on the island, I always put markers down for safety. You must have a marker to see if the water's rising. We'd only been fishing about half an hour till I look around and I seen one of the markers had gone.
Don't like this, Brian. I think we'll have to get out of it.
The river was rising, and I don't think people really understand how quickly a river rises in a flash flood. We generally thought that we were going to be washed away.
Brian has a heart condition. He's had a bypass, and I knew it was my job to get Brian back off the island as quickly as possible because of his heart.
It's too deep. We'll have to go back. How are we going to get over?
Brian's face showed it all. His colour was going out of his face. He was getting whiter and whiter.
It's a heaviness in the chest, and it's difficulty taking a deep breath. That's what I had on the island.
The men had been spotted from the bank, but even though the fire brigade had been called, their problems were only just beginning.
But it was far too strong for to roll the boat. You would never control the boat, it would have taken you away. We couldn't throw a rope, it was too far.
And eventually we twigged that the firemen were saying to us, cast your line.
I thought, if we don't do it with this, how am I going to get across? I've got to cast it for the sake of Brian.
Having seen him cast earlier, I wasn't, I have to tell you, very confident.
When I first casted, I was beginning to wonder, well, will me look old out for this?
When I saw the first cast miss, my heart sank.
Try again.
With just minutes left to get out of there.
And if it hadn't have worked, we would not have got off the island. Bless his heart, he cast like a genius.
Got it!
I started to reel the fireman's line in with my line, and I was hoping that this won't break. Mine only being 16 pound against this big rope of the fireman's and the force of the river. But with luck, my line actually held out. We pulled the boat across to where I was on the island and got Brian into the boat.
And away I went in this loop. And the firemen were pulling like mad, and thankfully we got into the shallows the far side, and very unceremoniously they pulled me out.
It was a hard job getting the boat back, because by this time I was getting tired. The river's still rising fast. The force of the water had actually taken me further down the river. But the firemen had all had a good hold of the rope and actually pulled it back to safety.
It was a special day in as much as it was my birthday, and I could not believe that this drama was going on around me. And to add to the disappointment, not a fish. No one had caught a fish. The next day, I went back, and I made sure the markers were in place, I made sure the boat was in place, and within a few casts, I had caught a beautiful salmon.
The hook I'd actually used for the cast to the fireman, I just bought that one. And I'll never use that one again. It's a lifesaver.
2 other people had to be rescued from the river in the same way that day. Remarkably, the flood, which almost swept them to their deaths, was caused by just 2 inches of rain falling further upstream. You never know when you might find yourself in an emergency situation, one which involves you knowing how to save a life. The BBC 999 Lifesaver Roadshow events offer training in basic first aid skills. If you'd like to attend one of them, we're offering 1,000 free places on this week's course to be held in Great Yarmouth. It's at Oriel High School, Galston, on Saturday and Sunday, the 6th and 7th of July. To book your place, call us now on 0891 339 999. Call should cost you no more than 50 pence. If you haven't heard from us, though, within 10 days, I'm afraid it means you've been unsuccessful.
Over the last 10 years, the Civil Aviation Authority has held nearly 500 voluntary safety lectures throughout the UK. They're attended by private pilots and maintenance engineers who want to update and improve their knowledge of aircraft safety. Last year, 18 people died in accidents involving UK-registered light aircraft and helicopters. So for the CAA, education in safety is a real priority. So far, more than 35,000 people have attended the lectures, and the statistics show that those who do come along have a very much better safety record than those who don't. In 1992, a private pilot called Jeff Dodd was on a routine flight from Blackpool Airport. On that day, he was to learn a lesson he would never forget.
Well, they do say, don't they, you don't have time to be frightened, and I think that's just it. I didn't.
He was very lucky. It was Friday, the end of the working day. Another 10 minutes, we wouldn't have heard the call, we'd have gone home.
When I heard the Mayday call for the first time, that was surprise.
He's doing it again.
And then it happens again. You know that that guy's in trouble.
At Blackpool Airport, a helicopter pilot, Jeff Dodd, played here by an actor, was filing details of his flight plan for the day.
It was a private flight over to the Isle of Man, and I was taking a colleague and a friend of mine across there.
Right, there you go.
We tried to get across on the Thursday. Unfortunately, the weather on the island didn't clear quite as forecast, So he jumped on a scheduled flight and went across by a fixed wing.
Isle of Man?
Cleared very nicely on the Friday evening. I went back and amended the flight plan for the new date.
Jeff had forgotten to change one crucial detail, the number of people on board.
I got myself an immersion suit, which I hired locally, and a May West. The water temperature at that time of the year, which was March, was around plus 10 degrees. So obviously you're not going to last too long in the water if you have to put down. Didn't have a dinghy, couldn't get one. It's not the highest priority, or wasn't for me. Spoke to Blackpool Air Traffic, got clearance from them to lift, climbing to 3,000 feet. But shortly after you leave Blackpool, they put you onto Wharton Radar, which is the local military establishment, which give you good radar cover to within striking distance of the Isle of Man. I was flying the Bell 206 Jet Ranger, which is a 5-place helicopter. It's probably one of the safest helicopters ever been manufactured. Lots of people fly them. It's like the Cortina of the sky.
Meanwhile, on the Isle of Man, a private pilot, Eddie Whittle, was preparing to fly in the opposite direction to Blackpool. He was briefing his passengers on safety procedures in the event of engine failure or a ditching.
The dinghy, this is the lanyard that you'll have to hold on to if we're going to throw it out. Don't let it go, whatever happens. If you take hold of the dinghy by the handles and throw it out, the jerk will inflate it. The dinghy really is the crucial part of the whole setup. The life jacket itself is only half of the advice to them. The important thing is to get into that dinghy, and I'll follow you through after. This is a chart here I'd like to just have a quick glance at. That is about what it is now, 8 degrees. It shows it at 1 hour, at the very, very outside. Beyond that, you're unconscious, and after that, you're just going to drown. They must get out of the water as quickly as they possibly can. Within an hour, at 8 degrees, you will be dead.
At Wharton in Lancashire, British Aerospace air traffic controllers were coming to the end of their only shift that day.
It's gone very quiet now.
I may as well wrap it up.
Okay. Cheers. It was a Friday. It was the end of the working day, as the aircraft suddenly declared a mayday, which was the last thing I wanted.
The engine warning light indicator came on. The loud horn starts blasting away in the cockpit, so you know something's wrong.
The engine had failed. Faced with this emergency, Jeff would have to try a procedure known as auto-rotation.
Auto-rotation means that when the helicopter's descending, it's the upward airflow through the disc of the rotor blades which keeps the rotors spinning, which is a bit like a sycamore leaf as it spins down to earth and gradually settles quite comfortably onto the ground. No problem. My problem was, of course, I was over the sea.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Golf Foxtrot, India.
I noticed that the turbine indicator had wound down to 0, so I knew I'd got a problem on.
West of Blackpool, attempting engine relight.
I attempted the relight, and unfortunately it didn't want to play.
Engine relight failed, preparing to ditch.
Golf Foxtrot, India, November, Sierra. Your mayday acknowledged. I alerted the rescue services. The most important part of that was RAF Valley, where the rescue helicopter was stationed. I knew at that time of the year, winter, the sea was very cold. His chances of survival were limited. He was going to have difficulty getting into any survival raft he may have had. So I was really worried for him.
My main thoughts were, how do I get out of this machine? And when I get out, what am I going to do then? So pull the hood onto my head and zipped up the immersion suit, but only this far. It should have been up here. The rotor blade's turning, so you're wondering what's going to happen to those when you hit the water. Are they going to break off? Are they going to come in and smash the cab up? You just don't know. The machine starts to fill with water straight away. My leg was trapped, which sort of panicked me a little bit. I pulled at my leg, got out, and just sort of floated away from the machine and immediately inflated the life vest. Well, I'm in the water, feeling very frightened, and the first thing that became obvious to me was the fact that I was getting cold very quickly, and I could feel the water going in through the zip at the top, which was only up to here and not here. So I thought, well, I'll try and zip it up. I knew what I'd done at that point. But my hands, within a few seconds, were so cold I could barely use them. I can't tell you how difficult it is to try and attune your mind to the fact that you might survive. I think it takes over and tells you that you're not going to survive.
Mayday, mayday, mayday.
Jeff didn't realise that Eddie Whittle had overheard his mayday call. But an even greater coincidence was that Eddie was in exactly the right place to spot him.
The helicopter is west of the ridge, he's somewhere around here.
It was obvious this gentleman was very, very close to us.
There he is. He's there at 2 o'clock. Get him. Have you got him? Yeah, got him. Right. I'm going to try and get round behind him. Don't lose him. Keep him in sight.
The immediate reaction was to get the aeroplane round to a westerly direction and get on his tail as quickly as possible, because once you lose sight of him, very quickly you'll lose sight of him when he settles on the water, and it will take a lot to find him. You have no reference points at all on the sea, and that's the thing.
Eddie and his passengers were able to keep the helicopter in sight even when it hit the water.
It was a perfect landing. It's quite a large splash, but obviously it didn't do any damage to him himself. He got out of the helicopter and got in the water, but he wasn't. Obviously, he hadn't got a life raft with him because that wasn't in the water.
Warren, Golf Romeo Golf. It seems to be a safe ditching. The helicopter's settled in. He's out of the helicopter, but there doesn't appear to be a dinghy.
I was even now more worried. And he then said he had a raft. Well, I couldn't believe it that he'd got a raft and was able then to assist. So I asked him if he could position to throw it out.
Well, in this situation, to throw anything from an aircraft, you endanger the aircraft immediately.
Right, Richard, we're on the approach to the pilot. What I want you to do is open the door, hold it against wind pressure. Paul, grab the dinghy, throw it out, and tug it. Let the lanyard go after the tug. Have we got it?
Obviously, there's extreme danger now for the 2 passengers and myself in this situation. There's a man in the water dying. What do we do?
It's easier said than done, because when you've got professional services helping somebody, they're equipped to do it. But he was a guy with a light aircraft, flying across the sea, who'd probably never done anything like this before, being asked to assist in an emergency situation. And I thought, well, if he throws the raft in the wrong place, it could drift miles from him.
Stand by.
If it had gone wrong, the scenario is if it had come up and wrapped around the tailplane, I think you can safely say that there would be 4 in the water dying. There's no 2 ways about it. There'd be 4 dead people at the end of it.
Right, now.
The jerk started the inflation, but the gentleman that was in the back, obviously in the situation, and the first briefing must have gone home pretty hard with him, because the guy didn't let the lanyard go.
Whatever happens, you must not let it go.
So instead of the dinghy just disappearing away, it actually snagged on the undercarriage, and I just shouted as loud as I could,
"And now!"
He let the lanyard go. Relief. I cannot say how much relief I saw when I saw it leave the undercarriage strut. I thought, oh, thank God, it's away. We didn't actually quite know at a glance whether it was in the right position. I gave it full power and just climbed away as quickly as I could and get to a safe height, because we're pretty low at this time.
The next thing I see in the water is what appeared to be a life raft. I didn't see it drop out the aeroplane. So I paddled as best I could, and it's very difficult trying to swim with a suit on, which is like a Michelin Man suit, if you like, and also this life vest. It's nigh impossible. But unbelievably, the raft floated towards me, and I made a grab for it.
There was no resounding cheer in the cockpit, because everybody was too shocked to take it all in, really. Once we'd levelled out at 2,000 feet and took stock of the whole situation, that one, I think, when it hit me, that, God, I can't believe this, we've actually done it.
The next problem was, how do you get into it? Try and get a boat or a dinghy out of the water. It's hard work. Somehow, amazingly, I got in and felt some form of relief over it. But my hands were so cold, it was painful.
It was now uppermost in my mind that we are now over water, no life raft, 3 people on board. It possibly could get in the same situation if my engine failed.
Warren is safely in the dinghy. We'd like permission to leave the area.
So
absolutely imperative that we track for Blackpool and get back over land before another incident could develop.
As Eddie left, a helicopter from RAF Valley was already on its way.
I was getting so cold, shaking violently. I thought the easiest thing might be if I just tipped myself over the side and gave myself a break. That's the state I got into because I just felt as I was going to die. I thought I might as well get it over sooner rather than later.
Having got into the dinghy was the most important part, but now we had to winch him out and take him back to Blackpool Hospital.
Incredibly, less than half an hour after Jeff had ditched his own helicopter, the RAF rescue helicopter arrived to pick him up. The crew were concerned when they saw one person, not the two listed on the flight plan.
The next thing I recall was not seeing anybody descending from a helicopter on a wire. He was actually next to me, shouting instructions in very clear, concise terms. And we put the sling around me and we're on the way up into the helicopter. The engine fumes which were being thrown down on me with the downwash of the helicopter was so warm, it was beautiful, you know, it really was beautiful. And I felt warmth for the first time. And then I realised, obviously, I was going to be okay.
How many were on board? Nothing.
I didn't realise that I hadn't changed the flight plan from the previous day as far as the passengers on board.
Just one on board.
Okay. Confirm there was only one person on board. The flight plan must have been incorrectly filed.
Of course, it's the old thing. You never think anything like this is going to happen to you, so perhaps you don't prepare yourself quite as well as you should. I'd not practiced it before. I'd not been on a course, on a survival course. So although I thought I'd taken enough precautions, it's like everything else. Unless you practice these things, things can go wrong. But if Eddie hadn't thrown me the dinghy, which enabled me to be more obvious in the water, apart from keeping me out of it, I would have been dead. No doubt about it. I would have just died.
Okay, mate, we'll get you to Blackpool as soon as we can. You'll be okay. They put him on a stretcher and wheeled him towards the ambulance where I was waiting to intercept, just to see if he was okay. He was. He was shivering a lot. He was very blue, but yeah, he was okay. That was the best. Yeah, that was the best moment, that, without a doubt. Thank God it all worked out. But, you know, you can't really do things like that and expect to get away with it every time, because the sea's one hell of a place to fly over. You've just got to know that it's an extremely dangerous place.
Next week, the lifeboat crew forced to manoeuvre under Brighton Pier to rescue two girls hanging on in a storm. And the late-night journey that ends when the driver falls asleep at the wheel. He's got a stake through his chest and nobody's seen it happen. To reserve your place on the Great Yarmouth Roadshow on the 6th and 7th of July, call us now on 0891 339 999. And to obtain your copy of the Lifesaver video pack, send a cheque for £9.99 to BBC Education, P.O. Box 7, London W5 2GQ.
In next week's Bad Boys...
Where is Fraser Hood?
The return of an old friend...
That man wants to kill me.
...marks the beginning...
Well, I'm reluctant to admit it, but I'll miss Fraser Hood.
...of an end.
Fraser's really dead. It's my fault.
Time to pay your respects in Bad Boys next Wednesday, 9:30 on BBC1.
She had a dream.
I'd like to drink a glass of wine in a country where the grape is grown.
Which wasn't shared.
You're going round the bend.
But that didn't stop her.
It was like I'd come to the far side of paradise.
I make your dream come true.
I think I've fallen in love.
Pauline Collins and Tom Conti in Shirley Valentine, Sunday at 9:05 on BBC1.
A nightmarish vision of the future, courtesy of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. BBC1 enters Dr. Terror's House of Horror at midnight. The moving story of a turning point now on BBC One. Harrison Ford and Annette Bening play high-living New Yorkers dramatically forced to question their lives in the film regarding Henry.
No experience necessary.
Likes to butt things with his head.
Hands